So in my last video, I talked about HBO's upcoming The Last of Us television series, and why I feel it could have been a great opportunity to expand the universe of that game. And it got me thinking about some of PlayStation's other franchises that could expand their worlds in a similar way. PlayStation has dabbled outside of games before, with varying levels of unsuccess. But with their new PlayStation Productions initiative, it would seem like they're interested in ramping up the amount of these projects they put out. So I thought it would be interesting to take a look at some of PlayStation's other IPs, and discuss what projects are already in development, and what others could and should be. Now, I've already expressed my thoughts on The Last of Us extensively, so I'm going to give that series a skip. I will be talking spoilers for some of these games, so you'll find timestamps in the description if there's a particular game you haven't finished, or you want to jump to the one you're most interested in. Horizon Zero Dawn is probably Sony's most popular new IP to emerge this generation, and it's easy to see why. Blending incredible action gameplay with light RPG elements, an intriguing story, and what is probably one of the most unique and well-realized worlds in any video game.
That's a laser raptor.
There has been no expanded material set in the universe as of yet, though a comic series was recently announced, set after the events of the game, and presumably leading up to the events of the yet-to-be-announced sequel. I think this would be an incredible universe to explore in live action, and while Aloy is an exceptional character and could absolutely carry a television series, Ashley Birch is such an important part of what brings that character to life, and unfortunately the game didn't use her likeness, making an in-universe project featuring her difficult. But that doesn't mean the show would have to go without Aloy completely. It could be a prequel, set around the time Aloy was discovered by the Nora tribe as a baby. Maybe it could have two storylines running concurrently, one set during the time of the old ones. There's potential, but I think there's another interesting character to explore in a television series, and luckily his likeness is based on the actor. After Aloy, Silence is my favourite character in Horizon. Initially appearing as a mysterious helper, his possibly sinister intentions are revealed as the game progresses. With the post-credits scene teasing his role as the primary antagonist in the sequel, he's sure to become an even more important figure in the franchise going forward. And this wouldn't be the first time Silence actor Lance Reddick has portrayed a character across both the game and live action, having done so in Quantum Break. A series delving into his backstory has heaps of potential, showing his first interactions with the Hades AI and exploring their symbiotic relationship. The story of an honourable man with noble intentions descending into villainy.
Knowledge has its rewards, don't you think? Well, let's begin.
Unlike Horizon, God of War has had several pieces of media set in the fiction of the game, including 2 comic book series with a 3rd on the way, a text-adventure Facebook game, as well as 3 book adaptations, one of which is read by Mimir voice actor Alistair Duncan. A movie adaptation was announced to be in development all the way back in 2005, just after the release of the original game, with Daniel Craig even being offered the role, which he turned down according to God of War creator David Jaffe. Talks of an adaptation began to quieten down, as the series started to dip both critically and commercially, but with the sudden reinvigoration the series has received, talks of a possible movie or TV series have begun to re-emerge. God of War is one of the few cases where I feel direct adaptation makes the most sense. This world does somewhat revolve around Kratos. He is the most interesting aspect of this universe, and there's not really an area in the character's history that we haven't already seen or will shortly be covered in one form or another. I feel like some kind of God of War project is bound to come to fruition eventually, and my guess would be that it would take inspiration more from the most recent game, taking place in the Norse era, with flashbacks to the Greek. If you've ever seen Arrow, I'd imagine this working similarly to the flashbacks to Oliver's time on the island. The original God of War games were a product of their time, with a vast majority of the characters feeling one-dimensional. Characters like Ares or Zeus have nowhere near the depth given to Baldur or Freya. Magni and Modi, for example, might seem shallow initially, but I think a character like Modi has much more depth than any character in the Greek era. An insecure coward, striving to live up to a family legacy, desperately seeking his father's approval, yet standing in the shadow of his more beloved brother. I think the show could take the approach to character work the new game has with the Norse pantheon and apply it to the Greek. Jason Momoa has expressed interest in playing Kratos, and I feel like that's kind of a perfect fit. He has the physique and intimidating presence an actor would need for that role. If The Last of Us is successful at HBO, my guess is that they're going to take a look at some of PlayStation's other franchises, and I think God of War would be the one they'd be most attracted to.
So I'm a man now. Like you?
No. We are not men. We are more than that.
Uncharted is Sony's best-selling story-based franchise, and I find it surprising that they haven't invested more in media expanding the world outside of the games. We've had a comic series, a motion comic, and an original novel set in the world, and that's all so far. As I'm sure many of you are aware, an Uncharted film has been in the works going all the way back to 2009. with several directors signing on and dropping out since. The closest the film actually came to being made was under the Fighter director David O. Russell, with Mark Wahlberg signed on to play Nathan Drake and Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci in supporting roles. O. Russell eventually dropped out, followed swiftly by Wahlberg and the rest of the cast, leading to the film changing hands several times, eventually landing on Night at the Museum director Sean Levy. Tom Holland was cast as a younger version of Nate, with the film serving as a prequel to the original game. And I think this is actually a good idea, letting the film retain the series' lead character but still take place in the universe of the game. I could definitely buy Holland as a Nate aged somewhere between the flashback to his first meeting with Sully in Uncharted 3 and the prison sequence flashback in Uncharted 4. This synchronicity with the games has kind of been broken for me though, with Mark Wahlberg's reattachment to the project, this time in the role of Sully. Now Sully is a crucial character of the series, and I think a movie version should absolutely include him, but Richard McGonagle portrayed the character on both sides of the timeline that this film is set, and I think Wahlberg portraying the character would disconnect the film from the games for a lot of people. Now maybe Wahlberg does a great impression of Sully, but while I do think Wahlberg is a good actor, he's not exactly someone I would say has a lot of range.
Oh, we're not in Ireland, Lucky Charms, we're in Texas.
If it was up to me, I would have kept Nate and Sully's interactions strictly to phone conversations, with McGonagall reprising the role. But that's just me. And while the film is apparently connected to the games now, if it's successful and turns into a series, I'm sure the films will start to take story elements from the games and even start to adapt them directly as Holland grows closer to Nate's usual age. Now Sean Levy did drop out of the film a few months ago and was replaced by Venom and Zombieland director Ruben Fleischer shortly before filming was due to take place this month. And according to Holland, production was halted last week after just one day of shooting. Fortunately though, the film is ready to shoot, so it's very unlikely that the film will be scrapped again. Antonio Banderas has been cast as the villain, with Sofia Ali and Tati Gabrielle in supporting roles. I presume based on their physical resemblance that Ali is portraying Chloe, with Gabrielle as a new character. Uncharted is due in cinemas July 16th, 2021. As for other ways the Uncharted universe could be expanded, I would love an animated film or series detailing more of Nathan Drake's adventures. We got a taste of what one of these could look like with Uncharted Eye of Indra, and I'm surprised more of these weren't made, though I have no idea if this was considered successful at the time, due to it being released for sale exclusively through the PlayStation Store, which was an odd choice for this type of content, though purchasing it did come with DLC for Uncharted 2's multiplayer. The recent revival and popularity of audio storytelling could also present an interesting opportunity. I've recently listened to Wolverine the Long Night, a scripted podcast serial following Logan, as he lays low in a small Alaskan town. And I was surprised how immersive this form of storytelling can be, making you feel like you're in the room with the characters. And I think this could be an interesting new way to experience an Uncharted adventure.
What was his name?
Logan. His name was Logan.
Aside from Uncharted and The Last of Us, Twisted Metal is the only other project confirmed to be in development at PlayStation Productions, with a television series in the works. There's been talk of a Twisted Metal movie for years, which I find kind of strange. Not that I think Twisted Metal doesn't have cinematic potential, but narrative is hardly the focal point of the series. Crank co-director Brian Taylor was originally attached to helm, which definitely makes sense given that film's erratic style and tone. Twisted Metal certainly has an interesting and varied cast of characters, and I imagine the series being kind of a cross between Death Race and Mad Max, with a touch of Friday the 13th thrown in. While I think a lot of the FMV cutscenes in the game can be a bit hokey, with a suitable budget and the right showrunner, Twisted Metal could make for one hell of a ride.
It's good to be back.
Now obviously Spider-Man is technically not a PlayStation franchise, with the character being owned by Marvel and all, but of course Sony does still hold the film rights to the character, which extends into animation. One of the reasons I was expecting the Insomniac version of the character to make an appearance of some sort in the Spider-Verse movie. This version did after all appear in the comic book crossover Spider-Geddon, and Marvel has wasted no time expanding the universe of the game with comic book adaptations of both the game and the DLC, along with the comic book sequel Velocity, which gives a backstory to the Velocity suit designed for the game by comic book staple Adi Granoff. Insomniac's take on the universe of Spider-Man is one of my favourite interpretations, and I'd love to see more of it outside of the games and comics. I think a theatrical film set in the world is unlikely, and the closest we could get to seeing the advanced suit in action on the big screen would be in a Spider-Verse sequel. But that doesn't necessarily rule out a movie of some kind. Perhaps a direct-to-DVD animated film similar to Batman Assault on Arkham, with the voice actors reprising their roles, serving as either a prequel to the first game or bridging the gap with its inevitable sequel. Though a prequel would rule out using the White Spider. Sony could also develop an animated series set in the universe, since they do still retain the television rights to the character, provided episodes are at least 40 minutes long.
I just told you that. Listen, I'm from the future.
How dare you point at me?
You were pointing first.
Rude to point.
You're being very rude. You're not even believing what I'm saying.
Which one
You're saying
pointed
I'm not who they
first?
say I am.
Spider-Man
That's all
pointed
you I
first,
am.
obviously.
In my opinion, Gravity Rush is the most underrated franchise in Sony's roster. I'll be honest, this is not a series I would have ever looked twice at, let alone played, if it wasn't a first party game. I'm not really big into anime, and I usually prefer games that take a more realistic approach to the art style. But I'm so happy I gave Gravity Rush a chance, as I fell in love with its beautiful open world, whimsical tone, style, quirky characters, and oddball humour. It's not easy for a story about a girl with her magical power bestowing space cat to balance boy troubles with genuinely intelligent commentary on prejudice and class warfare. The games have developed a relatively small but deeply devoted fanbase. Last year I was in the small town of Freiburg in Switzerland, and while I was walking around in my Gravity Rush t-shirt, a guy came running over to me, excitedly expressing his love for this series, and how he has never met anyone who has even heard of the series, let alone played it. Gravity Rush has the potential to be the next big thing in anime, on the level of One Punch Man or My Hero Academia, and will likely find far more success as an anime series than it did as a game. To get a sense of what this series would look like, take a look at Gravity Rush Overture, a 20-minute animated short that bridges the gap between the first and second game. Though turn on the subtitles, because the characters speak a fictional language that's kind of like a mix between Japanese, French, and Simlish. Netflix has recently tried to expand its roster of anime projects, with Devilman Crybaby and Agretsuko, and I think a Gravity Rush series could find great success on the platform.
Près de son canot.
Yharnam is one of the most visually awe-inspiring locations we've explored in games over the past generation. From its gothic architecture and Victorian-era aesthetic to the horrific creatures that walk its streets, a Bloodborne adaptation could justify its existence based on its imagery alone. Fortunately though, like every From Software game, Bloodborne features a vast wealth of lore that could potentially be explored. The current comic book series, set before the events of the game, follows a new hunter delving into the depths of Yharnam, and I think a similar setup would be perfect for an adaptation, and could feature characters like Father Gascoigne, Eileen the Crow, and Ludwig, maybe even going as far back as the very first hunt. Like Gravity Rush, I think an anime on Netflix would be the perfect fit for Bloodborne. While I would love to see Yharnam explored in live action, I feel like a movie wouldn't have nearly enough time to even scratch the surface of this world. And with such an abundance of monstrous inhabitants in Yharnam, it would have to rely heavily on CGI. And I don't think either a show or a film could convincingly bring these creatures to life within a reasonable budget, if at all. Given the massive success of their Castlevania anime, I think Netflix would jump at the opportunity to bring an adaptation of a game as beloved as Bloodborne to its roster.
Beasts all over the shop. You'll be one of them, sooner or later.
Days Gone writer John Garvin has been pretty upfront about where the creative influences of the game came from, pitched as a cross between Sons of Anarchy and The Walking Dead, and these influences are obvious when playing the game. While these connections do mean a TV series of Days Gone runs the risk of being a little too familiar for audiences, Deacon himself is a very interesting character, and with him anchoring a show, I think it has a chance to stand out. A show could take advantage of the fact that the actors do lend their likenesses to their characters, but let's say there's no interest in bringing Days Gone to screens. We have yet to receive any in-universe content outside of the game at all, and I think a comic book set during the 2 years between the outbreak and the events of the game would be great. Since Sony's big franchises do tend to get a tie-in comic at some point, I would say we're likely to get one eventually. Maybe the comic could hone in a bit more on the Siphon Filter connection, since the game heavily implies the cause of the outbreak was some form of that game's titular virus, and I suspect Ben might have bigger story plans with that connection than just an Easter egg.
Right, yeah, freak's a freak. What the hell do I care?
Like Days Gone, Death Stranding has the advantage of character models based on the actors. I think a series would definitely stand out among others on the television landscape. I'd love to see a prequel focusing on characters like Di Hardman, Bridget, Fragile, and Higgs. The show could even flash back to when the eponymous Death Stranding started, and how the characters who were around at the time and society as a whole reacted. Kojima has expressed interest in the possibility of Kojima Productions developing films and television series, so the series returning in some live-action form is more than possible, and as a storyteller, his previous work has shown that he likes to explore past events in the worlds he creates.
Once there was an explosion, a bang which gave rise to life as we know it. And then came the next explosion. An explosion that will be our last.
The tale of Drawn to Death is a tragic one. Developed by the Bartlett Jones Supernatural Detective Agency, a small team co-founded by David Jaffe, Drawn to Death was a multiplayer arena shooter, with the characters existing in an angsty teenager's sketchbook. Like Gravity Rush, this is a game I wouldn't ever have tried if it wasn't Sony published, but when I did, I found a fun and deep shooter with an incredible amount of style and some genuinely funny self-aware humor. The game unfortunately didn't land with most critics or players for a number of reasons. It was virtually unplayable at launch, taking forever to get into a game, and when you did, it would often be with just one or two other players. These issues were patched out over time, but the game still suffered from a sort of identity crisis. It was a $20 game, but the progression system was modeled like a free-to-play game, giving the players just one loot box per 150 kills. The game was free to PlayStation Plus subscribers for the first month of release, a move presumably in effort to replicate the success of Rocket League. But since the game was in such rough shape at launch, many who tried it quickly swept it aside. Servers for the game shut down last year after less than 2 years online. And I think that's a real shame. With a less hectic launch, Drawn to Death could have been a staple among Sony's multiplayer experiences. But the real star of Drawn to Death was its characters, and I'd love to see them return in an animated series. I'm thinking something along the lines of Drawn Together, vulgar and immature, with a mismatch of characters that seem like they should never be in the same room as each other. And that's kind of the point, a fact that went over many critics' heads when criticizing the game's humor. And while a return to the world of Drawn to Death might seem like a long shot, it might not be as unlikely as it seems. I actually asked David Jaffe about the possibility of a Drawn to Death comic or animated series during one of his Twitch streams last year, and he said he's been in discussion with Sony about doing something with the IP, or at the very least reacquiring the rights so he could produce one independently. Unfortunately, I couldn't find footage of the stream to show here, so you're just gonna have to take my word on it. So those are my thoughts on just some of the projects we could potentially see from PlayStation Productions. I didn't even have enough time to cover everything I would have liked to, like the seemingly cancelled Sly Cooper film, but one thing is for certain, it's an exciting time to be a PlayStation fan. What kind of project would you like to see in the future? Do you want a Resistance series or a medieval movie? Let me know in the comments below. I'd really love to see some of your ideas. I have a new video every week, so if you enjoyed this and you want to see more, feel free to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.